Welcome to panel 54 and Happy New Year, Waweru.
Happy New Year to you as well. It's good to be back.
It is.
Yeah, it was an interesting break though.
Very.
What happened in your sphere of the world?
So many things happened, but let me tell you that for the first time with my own eyes, not somebody else's,
Right.
I witnessed a pride of 19 lions take down a buffalo. And I have the videos to prove it.
Are you serious?
Yes, from beginning to end. Our tour guide was amazing. But yeah, actually, so our pride, it's rare to see something like that.
From Cairo to Cape Town, Lagos to Lamu, 54 nations, one continent, countless perspectives. Hi, I'm Waweru Njoroge.
Hi, I'm Njoroge.
Welcome to Panel 54, a global perspective through an African lens. This is the podcast where we unpack policy, people, power, and the paradoxes that define our time. With nuance, with history, and with a deliberate commitment to context. This isn't punditry, it's perspective. It's not a briefing, it's a reframing, and it starts right here. Let me ask you a question. How many, towards the end of last year, we saw where tour guides were now blocking animals and everybody was like, point and shoot.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah.
Was it that kind of scenario where there was like 50,000 people trying to do the same thing?
Interestingly, it wasn't.
Oh, cool. Because
Jimmy, our tour guide, they give him a shout out, just, I guess, knows the terrain really well. And he just was on the buzz and somebody said, hey, of course, like on the tours, they say, they call it Vichwa. Vichwa is lion, right? So they said, Kuna Vichwa Ukuju. And we were wondering, okay, what's going on here? So he said, you know what? There might be something up here. So he said, let's just go. And there we were. And it had just happened where one of the lionesses had essentially broken the hind legs of this buffalo. And it was 2.5 hours of push and pull and push and pull.
This was in the Mara?
No, this was at Olpejeta.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. And you sat there for 2 hours watching this happen?
It was unbelievably amazing.
Was it traumatizing for the kids?
Yes. And for me at some point, because the poor thing was in pain.
Yeah.
The poor thing was in horrible pain. And it had a partner who was kind of watching for a while. And after some time, he said, buddy, to the gods, this has been real.
Okay.
And so the last time he walked away, he never looked back after that one.
Skinny. Okay. Well, probably a lot more exciting than family. That's what the break is all about.
Yeah,
so
true.
Spend a lot of time with family, which is cool. Christmas was here, and then New Year's went down to the coast. Again, nothing that was wow. It was good to spend time with the family,
as it usually is.
Like that. Missed doing this though, because that
I know, me too.
So waking up on particular days and thinking, hang on, wait.
Missing.
So the week that was, so who's our guest? What do we need to prep for? Kind of thing. Took a bit of a backseat. But yeah, got a lot of other stuff, personal stuff done, which was, I suppose that's what the breaks are meant to be for.
Super duper. And I guess with that, we can actually look at the week that was, now that we are here, getting into our discussions for today, right? So welcome to panel 54. Before we get to our guests, here is, what you need to know for this week. So we saw the AFCON final. AFCON, of course, we know is the tournament that sees Africa's professional players on continent and outside the continent, different from CHAN, of course. But AFCON now saw the big boys essentially come to play. So the final was between Morocco and Senegal.
Big up to Nigeria for third place, huh?
Yeah, what they say, the Eagles trod down on the Pharaohs, but okay. So this was an interesting match. It turned into an embarrassment. Senegal walked off the pitch, protested a penalty call. Morocco's star missed the penalty with a horrendous chip, and the crowd was like, "Whoa!" It was undeserved in the first place.
It was a pass to the goalkeeper.
It really was.
Like, really? I was like,
it's football, not volleyball.
Yeah, have the ball. It's okay,
FIFA's president called it an embarrassing night for football on the continent, and Mane is now being lauded for getting his boys back on the pitch, and said he essentially was able to calm things down. Morocco, of course, unhappy with the final score, which saw Senegal taking that one goal in extra time, are now filing a petition of complaint with FIFA and CAF.
So what are they hoping to achieve with this petition?
I don't know. Are we going to go back to Rabat and play the final? Are we going to ask for a final in a different place? What are you asking for? Ban? I don't know. But it would be interesting to see the results of that filing of a complaint. But where I sit, congratulations to Senegal.
Yeah, the story.
Yeah.
Let's finish there. So I know we're going to talk about this at some point ad infinitum during the course of Final 54 this season. Museveni claimed his seventh term, 72% vote in an election conducted under internet blackout. Apparently, this internet blackout, according to the Ugandans, was caused by a male shark.
A male one specifically.
Specifically, a male shark that bit through the undersea cable. I don't think there's any surprise there, to be honest.
Come on.
I think they were just going through the ritual, going through the motions.
I think it's interesting that the male shark got the message to bite the thing the day before the election.
And the thing is, and you saw the videos that went going around, because Bobby Wine actually said he went into hiding apparently after his home was raided, alleging fraud, but he actually had video evidence, and those of us who were able to access it here and around the world did actually see people actually stuffing ballot boxes. And then to add insult to injury, Museveni's son publicly actually threatened him with beheading.
Yes.
So I don't know. I suppose we need to have this discussion with our guest about democracy and whether there is any true form of democracy.
Whether it exists in Uganda.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right.
Going further south, Julius Malema was convicted on firearm charges. It's been a case that's been there for a while. And it faces a minimum of a 15-year sentence. Pre-sentencing coming up. If he gets 12 months or more, he's barred from Parliament for 5 years. He's just starting to make his inroads a few years ago, and of course, then is a force to be reckoned with. A new book also alleges extensive corruption involving VBS bank looting and tender manipulation attributed to Malema. It's not the way you want it to go down, that's for sure.
But you have people who, reinvent themselves and come with a different name. I know that's happened here in Kenya. And then vie as a new, the butterfly that's come out of the chrysalis, and 15 years has made me find the Lord, etc., etc., etc.
Right.
I'm a different person. Yeah. Now, somebody I had no idea, and this is my 13-year-old daughter who told me this was. Actually, my wife also knew. Aisha Speed, right, did his African tour, right? So he's an American ice streamer. I found this out at the time, obviously. And he was doing a 20-country African tour. And that's obviously went viral. And I remember when people were posting it on social media here, and I was like,
what's going on?
What's the big deal, So his unfiltered live streams are showing millions of young viewers an African beyond stereotypes. And that's actually a very key message to a lot of the Gen Zs, obviously. Modern cities, vibrant culture, and genuine hospitality, not what we see, when aid, where they're showing kids with next to, flies around their mouth and all that. That picture vis-a-vis what he ended up actually showing. But the thing is, why would we have to have an outside person become a brand ambassador for Africa?
That's a big question, really, like why? Because there are people who would then be able to command an audience if they were known. Why do the things outside the continent become more known than the things within? I mean, it could be it's the answer to very many questions.
But we're known
that
for
you would
all the
ask
wrong
here.
things.
Unfortunately, unfortunately we are.
Yeah,
and what is this young man doing? Nothing really, if you want to think about it.
I couldn't even see properly. He was sitting in the back of a limo. He had this gadget on his hand and he kept typing it and just saying,
48 million people on a stream is something that is phenomenal.
It's a language maybe I don't understand because I could not fathom what he was talking about. But like I said, now I know who he is. I'm not following him yet. I doubt I ever will, but more power to him.
Indeed. So there's now a water crisis, and who else better to broker the mediation?
The main man himself.
DJT, Donald Trump says he wants to restart mediation between Egypt and Ethiopia over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, calling it a top priority. We've got to figure this out, guys. Egypt's demanding compensation, claiming it lost water because of where the dam is leading water to. Both nations have hinted at military action. The stakes are existential. That could be true because you're looking at a $14 billion
dam. And it's going to be supplying 300 megawatts of electricity. And then I was trying to wrap my head around the numbers. 38 billion cubic meters of water.
There you go. What is wrong with us? It's water.
Yeah.
Can we use it? Can we livelihoods? Can we just let the water run, literally, and use the water for what it was meant to do? This is the question.
Yeah.
It's been lauded as one of the greatest development accomplishments on the continent. And now we've wrapped it up in all kinds of drama.
If I'm not mistaken, Ethiopia did not borrow from China to actually build a GED.
Did not.
You know?
Did not.
That's in itself is a feat.
That's why it's one of the greatest.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So, the final story for the week, that was U.S. visa crackdown. Kenya gets a pass. Hoorah. It's not like the kind of pass that was given to the goalkeeper. Anyway, but that's a different story.
Different pass.
Kenya is one of only 10 African nations exempt from U.S. immigrant visa suspension. Meanwhile, 32 countries now face visa-bound requirements of up to $15,000, including Uganda, Tanzania, and Nigeria.
Surprise, surprise.
You guys didn't quite make the cut.
Sadly.
Oh, yeah. So Kenya's exemption shows its strategic value to Washington. Security partnerships matter, especially the military bases.
The bending of the knee, of course, is a big question that comes in here for lots of people in terms of what are you going to do? What are you going to do to see if you can get it back? Or if there's something that you should do. Should that even conversation come up?
And I don't think this now, I suppose it goes beyond the scope of what used to typically happen, is that we'll lend you money if you give us, if democracy, when we became democratic, you said we need multi-party. When Kenya got its multi-party, it was because we were being told, we're happy to give you money, but you need to change your democratic ways. So what would it take for countries like Uganda, Tanzania, and Nigeria to be given? I don't think they're now quite playing at the same level, but it would not escape me to think that they could get to the point where we say, okay, fine, we will change certain things within the way governance is done in this country.
Yeah.
If you give us, you put us back on the visa list.
Well,
sell your soul. I don't know.
And stay on the good side.
Yeah, that's my take.
All right, so now let's dig into all of this and what it means with our guests. Across East Africa, elections still take place and institutions still exist, but for many citizens, authority now feels less like consent and more like compliance.
Force is re-entering politics, often justified as stability, security, or inevitability. What feels new, however, is how quietly this shift is being normalized.
Our guest today has spent decades studying how authority is built, contested, and defended across the region.
Professor Peter Kagwanja is a scholar, policy practitioner, and one of East Africa's most influential geopolitical analysts. His work examines power not as abstraction, but as lived political reality, how it's exercised, how it's justified, and how it reshapes everyday political life. So, Prof, Karibu, welcome back. So good to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like to kick off with basically a farewell that you did. Yeah. It says, bidding farewell to my readers after 12 years, but my pen won't run dry. All right. I'm sure Du might have a different opinion, but you wrote 712 articles. 200,000 words short of 1 million words.
Yes.
And now you've said goodbye. But this is not the end we're going to see of you. Yeah. So what is it that you are looking forward to in terms of what you're going to be doing? And then I don't know I know you have an issue with him not writing anymore.
Of course.
I am actually going to write more than I used to do for the nation, because this was a contract and it was very restrictive.
So as we look around Africa, even as we jump into this, analysts are moving between academia, think tanks, and policy influence. We see that happening as governments continue to talk to each other. Figures like you tell us about, Mahmoud Mandani, Achille Mbembe, and yourself have shown how ideas do not just interpret power, they often travel into it. That proximity creates access and tension. We know this already. How do you define your role today in terms of how you played out? Are you explaining power? Are you advising power? Or are you interrogating power?
I'm doing all those, and also influencing power. The whole issue is that when you're in this space in which we are, you'll find yourself invited to the table, because a clear analysis of the structure of power in Uganda has no place for democracy as currently constituted.
Okay.
Because if you are a threat to Museveni's, family and close associates, then you have no place in Uganda. So dissent.
Or maybe on earth.
Yeah, dissent, even on earth perhaps.
Yeah.
Even dissent is therefore not around. Why is this debate necessary in Kenya? Because as Kenyans, we are a part and parcel of the East African community, that Museveni and I share citizenship and share a passport to boot.
I want to change gears. Move slightly forward north, and then we'll come back. I want to look at the other hot potato right now, which is Somaliland. Then we'll come back to Kenya, and let's start with the recognition first, in terms of Somaliland, which is a big topic right now. So Somaliland represents functioning institutions, right? Elections and stability. That's what it presents. Somalia asserts territorial integrity, but struggles with coercion. Recognition debates now expose a tension between legal principle and political reality. When a state recognizes Somaliland over Somalia's objections, is that diplomacy or disruption?
I would say it is total disruption, particularly if that position is unilateral. From the basics of diplomacy, Somaliland can never be independent or sovereign unless Mogadishu wants it.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter whether it's recognized by 100 countries in the world.
Right.
It will not be a state or sovereign state. If you doubt that, look at Kosovo. It is recognized by the United States, a number of European countries. Kenya recently recognized Kosovo, but Kosovo is in the United Nations. Is its flag raised every morning? The United Nations? No. Why? Because Serbia has not recognized it. Look at the other story in verse. Eritrea is a country in Africa now.
Yes, it is.
Which started in 1993.
Yep.
Right? How did it happen? Meles Zenawi of the Republic of Ethiopia wrote a letter to the United Nations that we recognize Eritrea as a sovereign state, and even went to war with Eritrea, and there was arbitration between two sovereign nations. Moving forward, look north of Kenya, South Sudan. For over 50 years, we transacted with Khartoum as our neighbor. Now we are transacting with Juba as our neighbor. How did that happen? 2011. There was a referendum there. Khartoum recognized the outcomes of the referendum, and that was it. A new nation was born in Africa. As the world watched, it was not a diplomatic breach in any way.
Right.
Now, today, Somaliland is part of Somalia. From 1960, May 1960, Somaliland has been part of Somalia. Not through conquest, not through coercion, but by virtue of reintegration of what used to be Somalia. Remember, Somalia was divided among different powers during the Barring Conference, the scramble and partition of Africa. There was French Somaliland, which is Djibouti. There was British Somaliland, which has been Somaliland now.
Yeah.
And there was Italian Somaliland,
Somalia,
which is now Somalia as we know it now. And the two Somalia, actually the British Somaliland was supposed to get independence earlier, but by that time Britain was in charge of the two Somalis. So if you're talking about the origin of power as the colonial power at independence in Somalia was the British, not the British. And the British wanted to carry a referendum in Somaliland about whether they want to be here or want to be elsewhere. And the decision was they would be in Somalia. And they formed the Republic of Somalia.
Yes.
Fast forward, there was a military coup. Siad Barre came to power and put every Somali under his own military dictatorship, one of the worst in the Horn or in Africa. Now, in 1991, Siad Barre is overthrown. Actually not overthrown. He ran to exile because the country had already burst into civil war.
Mm-hmm.
Now, clans in the north came together and they said, we don't want to be part of that civil war. We'll organize ourselves and shield ourselves here, not to be part of that civil war. So the rest of Somalia sank into civil war. The north consolidated itself as an enclave to protect itself. A year later, they formed Somaliland, not as a republic, but as an enclave within Somalia, but which is free. The civil war in Somalia took about 3 decades to basically quell. And at that time, Somaliland was consolidating itself on the basis of exceptionalism. The separatists in Hargeisa started constructing a kind of an independent state. And by 2005, when Somalia was deep into the worst phase of the civil war, and when even elders in Somalia started now talking about, we need to be serious about these talks and end the civil war, Somaliland started projecting itself as a model democracy with institutions, with a constitution, and so on.
Showing that it can work.
Showing that it can work.
Okay.
Which is basically opportunistic, because you are using the pride of your brother to show how good you are. At the same time, when the government emerges in Mogadishu, Somaliland is included. The speaker of the National Assembly of the National Assembly of Parliament in Somalia is from that place. And the deputy speakers, quite a number of positions, including cabinet positions, are allotted to Somaliland as one of the 6 regions of Somalia. So I see that opportunism whereby instead of participating in helping end the civil war and help your brothers to come out of it, then you instead seek secession and separation from that. And therefore there is anger in Mogadishu. There is anger in Somalia. And therefore Somalia can never say Somaliland can go. Fast forward, after in about 5 years ago, Somaliland now started going through the same path that Somalia had come from. Somalia was stabilizing. It has been recognized by the United Nations. As we speak, it's a member of UN Security Council. Actually, it is holding the presidency. It's a member of the East African Community, a very active member of IGAD, and a very, again, active member of the AU and its Peace and Security Council. So diplomatically, Somalia has emboldened itself. It has also become a member of the Islamic Union, League of, Islamic Union. It is in all the structures that are Arab/Islam. It is a very, very powerful voice.
Yeah.
Therefore, by the time Israel is recognizing Somaliland, it is basically running against the headwinds of a Somalia that is very powerful in terms of soft power.
We could go into the semantics about why Israel has recognized Somaliland, but I want to look at the aspect of security right now and ask this question. How does sustained presence of violent extremists, organizations in areas of Somaliland, complicate local governance, right? And what does that mean for how the government or international community should approach what's actually happening with regards to counterterrorism in the region?
Actually, what has happened is that the current government in Mogadishu is basically the first government to take the war against Al-Shabaab very seriously. And the president himself has been on the war front. The success obviously is limited by the fact that clanism in Somalia is a big issue. And therefore, when you come to sections of Somalia, it becomes very difficult to root out the Al-Shabaab. But international efforts from the United States, from Turkey, and others have completely degraded the Al-Shabaab. It is not as powerful as it used to be as a force. Paradoxically, the recognition of Somaliland by the Israelis is itself emboldening the Al-Shabaab, because this is a movement that rides on nationalism, and Somali nationalism is at its highest in defense of the sovereignty of Somalia. So the danger we have here is that moving to the future, Al-Shabaab will get legitimacy. Remember, these are children of the land, and therefore they might be called upon to defend Somalia. Now, the other thing is now the fragmentation and disintegration of Somaliland. As we speak, Somaliland is occupying only 35% of what used to be British Somaliland. Out of them, a civil war in the last 5 years, culminating in the massacres of in last Hanod, has led to the emergence of a new state called the Northeastern State as the 6th state. As we speak now, the 7th state is being formed in the east of Somaliland, the area bordering Djibouti and Patri, Ethiopia, which they are calling it's supposed to be the northeast, but they have a local name for it. And therefore, what you find within Hargeisa, within the Ishak clan, which is now the only remaining clan within Somaliland, they are dissent. And members of the Ishak clan are saying, we don't want to be isolated. We want to move to Mogadishu. We want to negotiate. And I've read some of the parts where they are saying it was never in the first place our intention to separate from Somalia. We wanted to be free of the civil war. We did not want to be free of Somalia. And I think there is need for dialogue than ever before between Somalia and the remaining group in Somaliland. As it stands, Somaliland will not be viable because with less than 30% of the territory and caged in this place called Hargeisa, even the strategic relevance of Somaliland is now, because Berbera and other ports are outside of this the new enclave.
Right. And still, this region still is volatile in terms of what happens talking through towards counterterrorism. And there has been U.S. intervention, if that's the word that you want to use. Is this the best strategy to keep things at a low, to see that there has been joint U.S. intervention with the government of the day to quell what is Al-Shabaab, which is an agitation of one would-be put together government against the rebels, as it were. Does U.S. intervention in this sense does it make sense?
It does make sense, because it's not just U.S. intervention. You cannot unilaterally say it's U.S. alone. It is the international community. Look at Turkey. Turkey has the largest military base in Mogadishu, the largest outside Turkey itself. You can also talk about the use of their technology. Look at Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the greatest defender now of Mogadishu. And you can talk about many of these other Middle East countries. Egypt has also committed to the same, to defend Somalia in terms of its transition from terrorism now to what it is becoming a stable state. And therefore, Kenya is a partner to Mogadishu in counterterrorism, particularly in the south. And therefore, there is no alternative to degrading and defeating Al-Shabaab. There's no alternative to it. And this is an international commitment, and there's no debate around it. The question is, how are we going to deal with the movement of Al-Shabaab from now the southern part and the central part now to Somaliland, when because of the instability that it's going to create, and the tensions that are there between Mogadishu and Hargeisa in terms of...
Is there permanency in that sort of approach? Because if there are joint, U.S. and other support that comes in to kind of quell tensions, it seems as though it's there temporarily. Well, does it make sense to have it as a recurrent feature in this region?
I think it has moved. You remember, we originally had the AGISOM, which was the IGAD peacekeeping force in Somalia. It was promoted now to AMISOM, which is African Union force, authorized by the United Nations Security Council.
Yes.
So it make it an international force. And now we are on the degree of the stabilization force. It has ceased now to be military. It is stabilization. It is authorized by. It is now run by the African Union and authorized by the United Nations. So we are almost. Somalia is almost winning itself out of external support. Turkey and other countries are training forces for the government, and I think it's all about how they're going now to organize their government. And governments are never perfect. We have Ethiopia has just come out of the civil war in the north, and it is it's still organizing itself. South Sudan has been in and out of civil war. It's organizing itself. Sudan is locked in a serious civil war. Again, it has to decide that. So it's the same case with Somalia. The problem with Somalia is that over and above the civil war between the civilian population, then we had the Islamists, the insurgents, the Al-Shabaab. And with them, they married with other international forces, Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And because of the way Somalia is, with the longest coastline, 3,300 kilometers, and also deserts and enclaves and spaces where forces can hide, international terrorist groups found themselves in Somalia and using the proximity of Somalia to the Middle East in order to supply themselves at any corner with arms, with supplies, food, water, and so on. So that is what this government has succeeded in doing, rocking all the windows, all the avenues of supplies for these forces. That's one of the way they've done it. But again, the question has been, those who voluntarily want to leave the force, I mean the insurgent, and join the government, is there goodwill to accommodate them? That has been the big question being debated within Somalia. But I think there is already a unit dealing with the rehabilitation of these kind of forces. But internationally, there is a total commitment.
Let me bring you back. You mentioned about Kenya's involvement in security and the aspect of military cooperation and things like that. I'm going to come back to the East Africa region, where several Western security partnerships have frayed or collapsed. I think you mentioned a few. Yet Kenya's relationship with the United States has not only endured, but it has actually deepened, right? So, in your view, why has the U.S.-Kenya security operation or cooperation remained durable where others have failed?
Because it is us. That shows you how strategic the Republic of Kenya has been.
We're likable.
No, we are very strategic.
We're useful.
Remember, we were born in war.
Yeah.
We were born in what we call the Shifter War, which would have cost us about 3 counties that we call part of our territory. And the population within that region at that time was willing to move north and join Mogadishu. And that would have cost us land and very valuable human resource that we needed. Therefore, we decided it was time to go to war. But we also recognize that we are a weak nation. We cannot wage war. So we went into partnerships for security so that we can liberate our resources for development, because we had 2 enemies. The enemies that want our territory and the enemies as defined at that time by our founding fathers, which is poverty, ignorance, and disease. Now, dealing with these enemies required a strategy, and therefore we outsourced our security first with the British. Then we went into a military pact with Ethiopia, which is still, I think, standing.
Yeah.
And then America came as a superpower, and we now went to them to train our troops, to supply our military, and also we allowed them to also have bases within our territory for the protection over people.
Okay.
And therefore, the political elite now could concentrate on development. That's how Kenya, which has only 18% of its land as arable, the rest is either desert or semi-desert, has managed to become the largest economy in East and Central Africa.
Would that point to decisions that are made diplomatically then that would then concern Kenya? Because we do see today that with restrictions coming in immigration-wise from the US, bond requirements up to $15,000. Yet Kenya stands as the clear regional exception. I mean, we've seen recently the lists. Kenya is not on that list. What explains the difference? Is there institutional trust? Is there utility? Is there usefulness by Kenya for the US, for example?
Kenya is the capital of the world in the Global South. We have the UN headquarters in Nairobi, and the UN is expanding. It's not shrinking. Quite a number of UN bodies are relocating to Nairobi, and therefore, not in the near future, that you're going to see Kenya shrinking in terms of its importance. Major companies are now here. I was meeting with one of the Swedish ambassador who mentioned to me that we now have about 50 Swedish major companies operating from Nairobi. The French have now reached almost 150 companies that are operating from Nairobi. Therefore, and remember, all the major humanitarian organizations from USAID to, you can mention Oxfam and so on, are also operating from here. Kenya is providing a base for those who are operating in hostile places, including Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia itself, Central African Republic. They are all operating from here. And therefore, it is not just a commercial capital for the South, for the world, for the Global South. It is also a diplomatic capital. And it's also emerging as a political capital for Africa.
Right.
I know in Mogadishu, in Addis Ababa, we have the African Union, but the majority of the ambassadors are also operating from Nairobi, or working with their counterparts from Addis Ababa.
So, just looking at interventions that have happened in Somalia, the Danab Brigade, it's an elite force. It was trained and supported by the US, pointed to as an example of how a Somali unit that is effective against extremist groups in the region. So does this suggest that military collaboration with international forces, is it one of the most effective ways to combat some of these groups in the region?
Yes.
Terrorist groups specifically?
Yes, because the success that the government has made in terms of degrading the Al-Shabaab has come from, first and foremost, grassroots mobilization, the clans and militias associated with clans, basically rising up against the Al-Shabaab and supported by the military, the Somali National Army, and supported technologically by partners, including Turkey, the United States, even Kenya as part of that. And therefore, the training of elite forces is part and parcel of ensuring that when grounds are captured, they are not lost the next day to Al-Shabaab. Because that was the problem with the AMISOM forces, that you go and occupy an area and they wait you out. You stay there. Then when you are at your weakest, they come and overrun you. And we have seen a lot of those in Kenya. You remember we've suffered several of those, opportunistic attacks. And the point that is emerging is that as Somalia moves now to the stabilization phase, it needs to have its own capacity. And that will require partners like the United States, Turkey and others to begin training. Turkey has already trained 15,000 troops for the government, which is why Mogadishu has become a little bit more stable. We've not seen a lot of attacks. And therefore, troops like the Burundi troops can be pulled out. Kenya will cut down its troops, and gradually Somalia will be able to deal with those ones. No country is always able to assert its authority in every corner. From time to time, spaces are taken over by alternative, wielders of instruments of violence, where they might be thugs.
Yeah.
In the United States, it's usually gangs. There are spaces where even the government will tell you that that's a very dangerous place to go because the gangs, are in force. They can organize on how to deal with the gangs. That sometimes takes place. The liberation of New York from gangs was a very, very, serious process. And that's why the mayor, I don't remember his name, the Italian mayor. So even Somalia will have, at one point or another, to subdue not only Al-Shabaab, but other terrorist groups that are in the country. No, and sometimes not even terrorist groups, criminal groups, like militias, that might be threatening the state. But that's the agenda for the future.
Okay.
But I agree.
So
partnership for security in Somalia is something that is very important.
Okay. So I want to shift gears again from illegal mining in Ghana, Galamsey, to environmental disputes in Zambia, actually, and procurement controversies here in Kenya. Perceptions of foreign impunity have become politically explosive, regardless of factual variation. So my question is this: from a power perspective, is this primarily an African enforcement failure, or is it very good exploitation by external factors?
Well, there are two answers to that. First, there is a long-standing agreement among the strong powers, informed by a very serious scholarship, that you make profit from country with resources in the hours of conflict. So the doctrine of conflict entrepreneurship has become entrenched, and it's in practice in many corners of the continent. The war in Eastern Congo is not just that the Congolese like fighting, that the Congolese love creating militias. There is a hidden hand of those who believe in conflict entrepreneurship. And that's also give profit or create avenues of profit for private security companies from outside the black waters of this world, the executive outcomes of this world, because they are protecting their companies that are operating in mines. You'll always find this in where you are extracting resources, well, mineral resources, for example, that are strategic to the survival and progress of international economy. And if you look at Eastern Congo, for example, we have 70% of the total world output of cobalt is from that part, is from Eastern Congo. And cobalt is what you need to run the new, clean energy technology. And you can go give that example to parts of West Africa, the Sahel region, and all. And the answer, therefore, is that we cannot at any time see these conflicts as natural. They are instrumentalized. Conflict is weaponized as in the control of certain resources. Second, number of governments in Africa have no capacity, political or security, to safeguard themselves or to control and govern spaces within their own countries, particularly if those spaces have those strategic natural resources, minerals and otherwise, which are claimed by Okoh people, militias, and they enter into partnership with international interests. So we have again seen, even in countries that would otherwise look like they are stable, you see that kind of dysfunctionality because of the interest. And we are going to see more of this, because Africa is usually one of the frontiers of these resources. Africa is fabulously rich in resources. And we have gone through the scramble for Africa, which is not completed. Major powers, China, Russia, United States, European Union, they are all trying to cut a niche within Africa because they need the resources that are there.
But who's been the most proficient at cutting that niche?
Who has been?
The most proficient at cutting that niche.
There's nobody you can say is professional or unprofessional. Why do I say
proficient? As in who's been
proficient?
Yeah, who's been the most proficient at actually cutting that niche?
And that's China, because China is a power in the global south, and it is operating within the cultural prisms and also diplomacy. It's the most organized in terms of its engagement with Africa, and there is not a single African country which will say we are being coerced into this, or we are being robbed by China. Why? Because within the framework of FOCAC, Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, all the African heads of state attend the summit. Take, for example, the 2024 summit in September in Beijing. Except Museveni, who for understandable reasons was not there. The other heads of states who recognize China, 52 of them were there. It is the single most attended forum globally. More than the United Nations, more than even the African Union. Why? Because everything is at stake. There's money for infrastructural development, which is not coming from the West. The West is not able to offer development support for infrastructure. The United States and Kenya are dealing with medicine, health. There's no infrastructure. The road that was promised by Biden won, then promised by Trump won to Uhuru Kenyatta, then Biden to Ruto, and now Trump again has not taken off from Mombasa to Nairobi.
So if there's any blame that's laid at the feet of anybody, are you saying then that it's not at the feet of China for anything that could be happening? And if there is, African elites avoiding responsibility, pointing fingers at China for exploitation, is that currently happening?
No, but the point is China has no capacity to exploit because it has no security or any other coercive mechanism to do that. The United States has, the European Union has, because they've been the colonizers. So in West Africa, the main debate has been about France and its control over the resources of West African states. That's the debate which we are still on about the good coups and bad coups, and the kicking out of France in Chad, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, in Benin, and others. All this has been about the coercive force that these powers exert. China is using soft power. It's using soft power. Look at our own country, Kenya, in the recent past from 2022. We went to the 2022 election on a very powerful and negative anti-China campaign. And this is a campaign that swept President William Ruto to power. Chinese are taking our markets. They are roasting maize in the streets. That was a tweet which was in one of the X spaces. The Chinese have built shops even behind our houses. That was one of the politicians talking about the China shop next to Kenyatta University. And so on. It was so ugly. It was so negative. Did China ever come to coerce us to go back to Beijing? Our interests took us back to Beijing. In May last year, President William Ruto made a state visit, very powerful state visit to China. He came from that state visit with a huge chunk of the money that was promised during the FOCAC summit. So the Mao summit road will be finished.
What happens when we can't pay it back?
When we
can't pay that money back?
This is the point. Most people are stuck at the debt model.
That's where
People moved. The debt model, the state-to-state lending, died a natural death. Because even with the best of goodwill from China, African countries can't pay. Because they are poor and they have not generated industrial capacity, huge exports to pay for huge loans. And two, some of the infrastructure being built will take a long time. They have to stimulate industries even to pay for themselves. So you had to change the model. And we were consulted experts. I was consulted myself. And we said, which is the best way out? Because we cannot say that Africa is going to stop developing because it cannot absorb loans. America did absorb loans and developed.
Are you saying that there is no... We talk about China not having the capacity to enforce in that manner, but are we saying that China sits back, basically, and says, well, here we are in partnership with you. Should you not be in a position to take from us or pay back, whatever, we'll just continue being friends?
No.
Surely there must be...
No. That's what we are saying. We brokered a new model. And the new model, the symbol of the new model is just behind us. The expressway. It's just behind us. You can take a ride on it. This is the symbol of the new model of investment, the PPP, public-private partnerships. And therefore, you will have investments in infrastructure that have nothing to do with national debt. If the private people out there in China and elsewhere are willing to risk their investment in Kenya, for us, we just give them the agreement, and the agreement is 20 years. After 20 years, you either, whether you have broken even or not.
I hear you, Prof, but I mean, China's not resting on its laurels, just hoping for the best for Africa. I mean, there are many things that are coming out of the continent. We're looking at what has been called illegal mining in Ghana. Reports coming out of 2025, as late as 2025. China's not just sitting back and saying, well, okay, we're not really interested in the resources. China is it's front and center in the race for Africa's resources, and it's not really sitting back and seeing how Africa will develop. So what happens in a situation whereby, sure, African nations are gearing up to line up for China money, but China is not sitting in the back room. China is also out there lining up for Africa's resources.
Not only that.
And maybe exploiting them at some level.
No, I agree with you. What you're saying is, you call it course 101 of international relations, which is basically that only national interests of nations thrive. Every nation come to the marketplace with its national interest. That's what's to trade. So what is China's interest in Africa? China's interest in Africa are threefold. One is the population of the continent. First and foremost, the population of the continent is China's greatest asset. By 2050, Africa is estimated to have more than 2.5 billion people. It will be the most populous. Now, educating this population in China, equipping it with Chinese technology, and is part of its building soft power. So what has happened? China has now outstripped the United States. By last year, it outstripped France as the largest destination for African students anywhere in the world. The population of African students going to China, even government-trained experts, is now the highest. China is doing that within the framework of the FOCAC so-called action plan. The action provides for capacity as part of that. And that capacity, if we learn from the past, is both ideological, meaning you want to win hearts and minds, and at the same time, it is selfish in the sense that you want to produce people and power, people with technologies and skills that are aligned to your own, to your own capacities.
But if I'm the one, forgive me, if I'm looking at it from the perspective of, right, I will be, as a young person, I'll be taken to China, I'll be trained vocationally, what have you. is that actually in the best interest? Are you actually looking at that from that perspective of, I'm looking out for the best of this young person who can become a technician, etc.? Or are you then saying to this person, for lack of a better word, aligning yourself to say, yes, I completely, I absolutely love what China is doing and everything. Isn't that, for lack of a better word, and the most ignorant way of putting it, isn't that a form of bribing? I would say the same thing for anybody who's been taken to write, who's been taken to the universities there, come back and write a story about China. And we'll notice the linguistics is pretty much all the same. Everything is, it talks very nicely about it. And it's not to say that we're biased or anything like that, but that what you're talking to, the aspect of soft power, where you are using that to then create an influence, but is it based on an actual, is it an ethical position to stand, or is it a bit of buying somebody's loyalty?
No, it is very, very moral and ethical. The United States started making inroads into Kenya through the airlifts. And 60 years later, it would give birth to the first black American president, who is Kenyan, Obama. Obama is a product of the airlift. His father was a minister, was an official in the Kenyan government, very close to Tom Mboya, right?
Okay.
So and George Saitoti and others. Mwai Kibaki was a beneficiary of airlift to Britain, getting a scholarship and so on. Seated here myself, I'm a product of airlift to the United States. I went to Chicago and studied as a Fulbright scholar. That's why I seated here. So the training is part of it. Now look at it. To give you an even more impactful example, the entire infrastructure of our technical institutions in the Republic, which is the flagship of President Ruto's, rejuvenation of the economy, is itself equipped 100% by China through AVIC International. I am a chair of a board of Governor Muranga Technical Training Institute. And we have machinery in that institute that can make spare parts for all Kenyan cars. They have that capacity. Technically, machines that are computerized. We're not talking about a hammer and a chisel.
Right.
These are computerized. Now, why is China doing that? It is part and parcel of the old practice of, winning hearts and minds by way of building human capacity. And I say that is one of the skills it's using. The second that China is using in terms of getting to the continent is opening its markets and giving zero tariffs. And Kenya is among the first countries now to benefit. We have signed an agreement, it was launched, and now the items that we can export. Do you know President William Ruto is one of the major exporters through Kenyan exporters of avocado to China? Now, which tells you that when you cross AGOA in the United States, now you open a new market.
So I hear you, Matt. And so we're looking at AGOA as of 2 weeks ago, being reopened again for another period of time because the benefit there is seen as well. So when you look at China, and this may be the last spanner in the works that we'll throw at this point, but it seems as though structures are set up for the soft geopolitical power that we know needs to exist between the world's superpowers. And that gone are the days where you use bombs and guns to fight a war. But you will have an economic struggle. And if you need to win the hearts and the minds of Kenya, Zambia, Nigeria, whomever else is lining up to take the goodies that are on offer, that you will do whatever you need to do in order to be up there in terms of the rungs of power in the world. It's happenstance. If the people of Kenya happen to get a university with, everything that they might need, well and good. But at the end of the day, China remains number one in terms of the interest for the things that it's doing. Does it not?
It is the single country in the world that is deploying a soft power in the most effective way on the continent.
Okay.
And it is doing that in a way that brings the element of what you can call consensus rather than coercion.
Okay.
It is doing that through persuasion rather than basically blackmailing. And I can remember a debate, and I'm not going to mention names, that in 2000, I think in 2018, President Uhuru Kenyatta was to make the trip, the first state visit to State House under Donald Trump. The first Kenyan state visit since the 1980s. And 5 days later, there was going to be the Belt and Road Summit in Beijing. And the question was raised in White House, are you going to Beijing after the state visit? And he said, yes, we're rushing there. Why? The explanation given by Kenya at that time was that, yes, you are our friends. We are having a lot of things, but there are areas where you are not addressing our interests, which is the infrastructure. We need markets, and we need technology. So we are going to China. And the government went, and US was not happy, but they went. Why did they go? Because of national interests. Now, don't bother about African countries that are silly enough, naive enough not to understand that what governs are the national interests of countries.
Absolutely.
It is not what the other person wants. Study China and what they can offer to you. And look at what they are interested in you, which can harm you. And you strike it out. Now, minerals in Kenya or in any other part of Africa should never leave the continent unprocessed. That is a principle that has been adopted by the African Union. So the issue of exploitation is not even there, because minerals are supposed to be processed within the continent. Why? They can create the backward and forward linkages that will create employment, do add value addition to our minerals that we gain from that. The moment you allow people to shift minerals and put them in ship or even soil and go and shift it abroad and get gold or whatever they want, now that is not a problem of China.
So I suppose that answers the question about whether it's not exploitation. It might be a shortcoming of the state.
And there have been many other shortcomings which do not even involve China or United States. They are simply governing their countries badly.
Okay. So now, speaking of China, I'm going to now throw in other people in this mix now. So there's China, there's the US, there's Gulf states, there's Turkey, and there's Russia, who are now operating in Africa. Right? So choices for us as Africa seem to be wider. Yeah. Yet bargaining power often feels unchanged, even if whoever you're dealing with. So does multipolarity genuinely expand African agency or simply diversify the pressure?
It is all about Africa thinking for itself.
Okay.
And I think the fundamental question we're asking as scholars is, who thinks for Africa? Because if somebody else thinks for you, then you make the bad choices in the emerging international order. Because the emerging international order is actually seeing the return of hegemony, where countries are only seeking for themselves. The emergence of nationalism, where people are talking about America first. They are talking about Europe first. This is what we're seeing happening. And when we have that kind of arrangement, you can no longer continue to draw your thinking and draw your inspiration from multilateral organizations like World Bank and IMF. You have to build your own internal capacity to think for yourself and to formulate your own policies that are based on your national interest.
Okay, that makes me excited. Because then the question is, do we see the practice of this nationalism by the recent involvement of other countries, like Waweru was saying, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, involved in what's going on in DR Congo, in what's going on in Sudan, and brokering peace deals coming out of the Gulf? Is this all in is it sought after nationalism, or is it sought after national interest for what can be a commercial transaction?
I think the question is, if somebody came to you, if you're walking along a road and somebody asked you, excuse me, please, yes, where am I going? I think you would think twice whether this person is sober or not.
Right.
Is it okay? Because the relevant question would be, where is Nairobi from here? Or where is Muranga from here? That's a more relevant question. I think the questions we're asking in Africa is about others, not us.
Yeah.
Because we take direction from where we want to go, not where others are going. Now, the fact that we are seeing all these countries coming in, for many of us who have been in this field for a long time, is something to celebrate.
But just because we're the prettiest girl at the ball, are we going to confuse that with actually, do we have leverage?
Yeah, let me
from that perspective.
Yes, and I'm going to answer that question by saying, if you go back to 1990, when Africa was described as a hopeless continent and was facing isolation, the solution to that was found by the Japanese. They said, no, we cannot ignore any part of the world. So they formed the Tokyo Conference, TICAD.
Yeah.
Being the pacifists that they are.
And TICAD was about ensuring that the debate on Africa does not die, because we cannot afford to isolate and leave behind one part of the world. Today, it's the universe. Everybody has what we call 1+1. 1 plus Africa kind of arrangements. Russia has Russia Africa. We have China Africa. We have Europe Africa. America has America Africa, because Africa is now at the heart of the global economy. It's at the heart of global imagination.
So
of prosperity.
Why aren't we calling the shots?
Because we are because in a number of cases, for example, in China, the formation of FOCAC 25 years ago was itself, what do you call it? It's a watershed.
Yes.
In many ways.
Okay.
And because of that, in this country where you are sitting in, you have seen the transformation in terms of infrastructure.
Yeah.
It used to take 3 to 4 hours to move from Gigiri to the airport. Now you're taking only 19 minutes.
Yeah.
Again, we are talking about moving to our rural areas. In my own county of Muranga, there is nowhere where we don't have tarmac. Reason being, the resources for infrastructure building have come in. The danger also lies there. We have talked about debts and managing debts.
Yes.
And where did we have the capacity to manage debts? Second, the capacity to bargain and negotiate this beyond individuals. Now, we are not going to rely on William Ruto for the next 50 years, because he will not be there to negotiate the future of Kenya. And therefore, the earlier we start building capacity for engaging others by way of centering our national interest and negotiating from there and building capacity for the nation to negotiate on that, the better we do. We have done a bad job with the World Bank. We have done a horrible job with IMF. That's why we are in their debt enslavement. Every time we are talking about debt, 80% of our debt is with the multilateral donors, the World Bank and others. And where do this money go? You don't know. It is supposed to be budget this, budget that. So why most of us are more inclined to like what we are seeing from Rook East, whether it's Korea, whether it's Malaysia, or whether it is China or India, is because you can see what is being done. You can see the road, you can see the bypasses that are in the country, and you can see dams that are being built. But in a number of those other cases, you could not see those, because much of the money, for example, if you go to the Moi era, that came from donors, literally ended in people's pockets. For a number of countries' debt, the whole amount of development support for Kenya went back to Geneva in people's accounts. And that's how the donors started complaining that we give this for this. Now we are seeing this, money this is reflecting in people's accounts in Geneva. So again, that is not the problem of them. It is our problem. Because if you don't build the capacity, and this is what us as scholars are saying,
yes,
within the platforms of the African Union, within the platforms of the East African community, we are saying if we are not able to negotiate and build that capacity to do so, then we have nobody to blame if we don't benefit from the second scramble for Africa. The first scramble for Africa enslaved us. The second scramble for Africa must set us free. That's not what's happening.
And that's a quotation we're going to put on a mug.
There you go. That's something to put on a t-shirt.
That's
absolutely.
definitely something to put on a t-shirt. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, sharing those insights with us definitely have been interesting, looking at the direction in which the world is going to go, whether you like it or not. Professor Kagwanja, thank you for joining us on this episode of Panel 54 to have this conversation.
Thank you. What a debate.
Indeed. Anything that leaves you with a bit of a sweat is a good thing.
Yes,
no.
Always.
Always.
And that gets you excited about what you're talking about.
True.
Indeed.
True.
Yeah. I also like the questions you put forward.
Thank you.
Because they also provoked my thinking.
Thanks for turning up again.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you. This conversation reminds us that power rarely announces itself as repression. It arrives justified as stability, security, or individuality.
We've examined how elections hollow out, how infrastructure disciplines politics, and how external partnership can strengthen states while weakening accountability.
Africa's challenge today is not access to partners. It is the political will to enforce rules consistently, even when enforcement is costly.
The deeper question is whether power will be restrained or simply inherited in harder form by the next generation. Whether today's shortcuts become tomorrow's political culture. Because legitimacy is not preserved by force alone. It is earned through limits.
This is Panel 54, where we rethink the world one African perspective at a time. If it made you pause, reflect, or reframe, share it. Start a conversation and tag us in. Find us on your favorite streaming platform and follow us on social media.
Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and remember, keep the lens clear.